Imagine waking up to find half the village whispering your name because you cured a cough with rosemary. Could an innocent birthmark, or even baking bread at night, seal your fate at the stake? These are 15 startling reasons you might have been called a witch in the medieval age. What if a freckle could damn your soul? In medieval Europe, the smallest mark on your skin could become evidence of the devil's handiwork. Birthmarks, moles, or even extra nipples weren't just quirks of nature. They were witches' teats, physical proof that you were feeding demonic familiars with your own body. Imagine a local woman noticing an unusual spot on your shoulder while at the village well. Within days, whispers spread. Within weeks, you're stripped naked before cold-eyed inquisitors searching every inch of your body for these so-called marks of Satan. They'd probe each spot with needles, looking for areas that didn't bleed or feel pain, supposedly proving their supernatural origin. The medieval mind couldn't comprehend random biological variation. Everything had meaning, especially anything unusual. And in a world where invisible devils lurked around every corner, these visible anomalies became the perfect evidence of invisible evil. Women with more prominent moles might desperately try to remove them, risking infection and scarring that ironically only made them look more suspicious. One Lancashire woman confessed to witchcraft in 1612 simply because she couldn't explain away the strange mark on her left side that refused to heal. Could signing a bill with your left hand cost you your right to live? For medieval southpaws, everyday actions carried deadly suspicions. The very word sinister comes from the Latin for left, revealing how deeply this prejudice ran through European culture. Left-handedness wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural, a deliberate rejection of God's order. The right hand belonged to Christ, who sits at the right hand of the Father. The left, that belonged to the devil. When you reached with your left hand, you weren't just grabbing bread, you were symbolically choosing Satan's side. Churches enforced right-handedness with brutal efficiency. Children had their left hands tied behind their backs or beaten when they used them. Those who couldn't conform faced growing suspicion. A woman who stirred her cooking pot counterclockwise with her left hand wasn't just making stew. She was potentially brewing trouble. The physical awkwardness of left-handed people using right-handed tools created clumsiness that itself became evidence of otherworldly influence. "See how the devil makes her stumble," they'd whisper as a naturally left-handed woman struggled with right-handed scissors. Simple biological difference became both physical burden and spiritual death sentence. When did chamomile tea become a gateway to sorcery? For medieval women, the line between helpful herbalist and harmful witch was thinner than a poppy petal. The woman who eased your childbirth pain yesterday could face the pyre tomorrow if your baby caught a fever. Women passed down plant knowledge through generations. Which herbs stopped bleeding? Which bark eased toothaches? Which flowers calmed colicky babies? This practical wisdom predated Christianity, linking directly back to pagan traditions that the church viewed with deep suspicion. While university-educated male physicians quoted Latin texts and prescribed exotic ingredients, village women quietly cured the same ailments with plants growing behind their cottages. Their success threatened both the church's spiritual authority and male physicians' professional status. When Agnes Sampson of Scotland successfully treated the sick with herbal remedies in the 1590s, her neighbors initially praised her skills until the praise turned to fear and then to accusations. Most damning was when treatments actually worked. If you couldn't explain how your poultice drew out infection using approved Christian theology, the assumption was that your power came from darker sources. Success became your most dangerous evidence. Is your night owl schedule actually a pact with darkness? In medieval villages where most work stopped at sunset, a chimney smoking at midnight wasn't just unusual. It was alarming. What unholy business required such secrecy? Working by moonlight made practical sense for many. Daylight was precious for field labor, so tasks like baking, mending, or spinning were pushed to evening hours. A poor woman might save expensive candle wax by working under the full moon, but practicality offered little protection against suspicion. Medieval towns enforced strict curfews with night watchmen patrolling streets after dark. Being caught outside without good reason, or worse, gathering with others, could trigger immediate suspicion. The night belonged to the devil and his servants, according to preachers. Those who embrace darkness must share his nature. The sight of a lone woman gathering herbs by moonlight, or the smell of bread baking at 3 a.m., became entries in watchmen's reports and neighbors' testimonies. Economic necessity forced many women to work unusual hours, and those same unusual hours forced many women to face witchcraft accusations. Could your purring pet be your demonic familiar? In medieval Europe, that independent mouse-catching companion might mark you as the devil's servant. The closer your bond with your cat, the more dangerous your reputation became. Pope Gregory IX's infamous 1233 decree, Vox in Rama, explicitly connected cats, especially black ones, with satanic rituals. The document described devil worship ceremonies where black cats were kissed and adored, cementing the association between felines and witchcraft for centuries. The tragic irony? As Europeans slaughtered cats by the thousands, rat populations exploded, helping spread the Black Death. The very animals killed as demonic familiars might have saved countless lives had they been allowed to do their natural work. Elderly women living alone often kept cats for companionship and practical rodent control. When these women were observed speaking to their pets, as many cat owners naturally do, witnesses claimed they were receiving instructions from Satan himself. Court records show women confessing, often under torture, that their ordinary house cats could speak, shapeshift, or deliver messages to other witches, proving that loving a cat could literally become a death sentence. Guess the rain tomorrow. Lose your life today? For medieval farmers, predicting weather wasn't just conversation, it was crucial survival knowledge. But those who showed too much skill at forecasting nature's moods quickly faced accusations of controlling, not just predicting, the elements. Wise women and men studied cloud patterns, animal behaviors, and seasonal rhythms. When the barn cat cleaned behind its ears or the cattle lay down in the field, rain was coming. These folk observations often proved remarkably accurate, sometimes too accurate for comfort. When Margrethe Suersdottir of Norway correctly predicted 3 major storms in 1650, neighbors didn't praise her foresight, they accused her of creating the tempests. Scottish wind buyers were said to sell favorable breezes to sailors, while German weather makers faced execution for allegedly destroying crops with hail. The actual ritual, often as simple as throwing a stone over the shoulder into water while mumbling old prayers, matters less than the connection made between human words and natural disasters. In an age before meteorology, the line between prediction and causation blurred easily. After all, if you knew a storm was coming before anyone else, perhaps you had called it yourself. When lightning struck after you argued with a neighbor, was it coincidence or your curse? Was losing a spouse proof you'd hexed him? For medieval women, grieving a husband meant not just emotional loss, but dangerous new suspicions. The tears at your husband's funeral might be read as crocodile tears. False grief hiding wicked satisfaction. Widows disrupted the neat social order, especially those who inherited property. Neither under father's control nor husband's authority, they occupied an uncomfortable middle ground. When Catherine Parr survived 4 husbands, including King Henry VIII, whispers of witchcraft followed her despite her royal connections. Property and inheritance amplified these suspicions. When a husband died unexpectedly, leaving his widow financially secure, neighbors might question whether she had hastened his end through occult means. The North Berwick witch trials of 1590 featured multiple widows accused of using magic to waste their husbands. Most damning was how grief itself could appear suspicious. Weep too much? You're putting on a show to hide your guilt. Weep too little? Your cold heart reveals your true nature. For medieval widows, there was often no right way to mourn, only varying degrees of suspicion that could eventually lead to the stake. Out of sight, out of salvation? In medieval communities where you lived spoke volumes about who you were. Those dwelling at the forest edge or beyond the village proper lived physically and spiritually on the margin, and margins were dangerous places. Medieval maps often marked forests and wild spaces with dragons and demons. These weren't just artistic flourishes, but reflections of genuine belief. Wilderness harbored evil. Those who chose to live there or were forced to by poverty or social rejection were assumed to share something of that wildness. Occupations requiring isolation created particular vulnerability. Shepherds watching flocks alone on hillsides, charcoal burners working deep in woods, or millers with watermills outside town walls all faced heightened scrutiny. Their necessary solitude was easily reframed as chosen secrecy. Physical distance created mental distance in neighbors' minds. When you rarely saw someone at church or market, stories filled the gaps in knowledge. The old woman who lived in the forest cottage might be gathering herbs for healing, or consorting with woodland spirits. Without daily interaction to normalize her presence, fear and fantasy took root, sometimes with fatal consequences. Could a chalk circle become your circular gallows? The very symbols meant to protect you might condemn you instead. Throughout medieval Europe, people carved, chalked, or painted protective marks on doorways, cradles, and barns, often without realizing these practices had pagan roots that the church condemned. Archaeologists have found witch marks like daisy wheels, hex foils, and pentangles carved into barn beams and church pews across Europe. These weren't witches marking territory, but ordinary people seeking protection from evil. The irony? These protective measures could become evidence of the very witchcraft they were meant to ward off. A woman drawing a traditional sunwheel above her baby's cradle wasn't worshiping Satan. She was following her grandmother's advice to keep the child safe. But to educated churchmen, these pre-Christian symbols represented dangerous superstition at best, demonic ritual at worst. The confusion between defensive and offensive magic proved deadly. The same chalk circle drawn to keep evil spirits out could be reinterpreted as a magic circle to summon them in. The herbs hung over a doorway to bring good fortune could be claimed as part of a curse. Protection became persecution through the simple twist of interpretation, turning safety-seeking into soul-endangering in the eyes of suspicious neighbors. Who else held life and death in one slippery grasp? Midwives occupied perhaps the most precarious position in medieval society. Essential yet feared, respected yet suspected. They stood at the threshold between life and death, wielding knowledge that seemed almost supernatural to many. Childbirth remained mysterious even to learned men, who were typically excluded from the birthing room. What happened behind those closed doors where women helped other women through blood and pain toward new life? The secrecy necessary for modesty bred suspicion, especially when things went wrong. Midwives knew herbs that eased pain and stemmed bleeding. They knew how to turn a breech baby or cut an umbilical cord. This practical knowledge saved countless lives. Yet the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual, specifically warned against midwife witches who supposedly offered newborns to Satan. Most dangerous was the high infant mortality of the era. When babies died despite a midwife's care, grieving parents sometimes looked for someone to blame. The woman who had witnessed both mother's pain and child's first and sometimes last breath became an easy target. Her healing hands, still stained with birth blood, could be reimagined as hands that had strangled life rather than welcomed it. Chart a star. Char your soul. The medieval cosmos operated under strict class divisions. When university scholars and royal astrologers studied the stars, they practiced noble science. When peasant women did the same, they practiced dangerous sorcery. Monasteries kept meticulous astronomical tables, tracking planetary movements for religious calendars. Kings consulted court astrologers before battles or marriages. Yet these same practices, when performed by ordinary people without Latin or formal education, transformed from scholarship to witchcraft. The 1320 Paris Theological Faculty specifically condemned judicial astrology, using stars to predict human affairs, yet nobility continued consulting astrologers with impunity. Meanwhile, a village woman who planted by lunar phases or predicted weather through stellar observation risked accusations of manipulating, not merely reading the heavens. The growing popularity of almanacs in local languages democratized astronomical knowledge, causing elite panic. A woman who knew when Saturn entered Capricorn without church education must have gained that knowledge through unholy means. The stars themselves weren't demonic, but your social station determined whether you could safely look up at them. Does multilingual equal multidemonic? In an age when most people never traveled beyond neighboring villages, someone who spoke multiple languages wasn't just educated, they were deeply suspect. Unknown words sounded like incantations to untrained ears. The church maintained a Latin monopoly, controlling access to sacred texts and legitimate learning. When ordinary people, especially women, displayed knowledge of other languages, authorities questioned their sources. Had they learned from books, rare and expensive, or from demons, all too available according to preachers? Traders and travelers faced particular scrutiny. A merchant's wife who picked up Arabic phrases from her husband's business associates might find those exotic sounds reinterpreted as demonic speech. Joan of Arc's trial transcripts show repeated questions about her strange language when praying, a dangerous line of inquiry suggesting communication with spirits. The Crusades paradoxically increased both linguistic exposure and xenophobic fears. Foreign words entered European languages alongside foreign fears. In this atmosphere, a healing charm muttered in old Celtic or Nordic phrases wasn't alternative medicine. It was evidence of consorting with ancient pagan powers better left forgotten. One twirl too many. Bear the brand of the damned. Medieval communities maintained strict rhythms of work and worship, with approved celebrations on church feast days. Dancing outside these sanctioned occasions, especially in wooded areas at night, quickly transformed from innocent revelry to suspected Sabbath rituals. Spring and harvest celebrations had ancient roots, often incorporating circular dances around trees or bonfires. Church authorities worked to Christianize these traditions while controlling their timing and nature. Dancing on St. John's Eve might be reluctantly permitted. Dancing a week later could bring accusations of devil worship. The infamous dancing manias like the 1518 Strasbourg epidemic, where people danced uncontrollably for days, were initially attributed to saints' curses but increasingly reinterpreted as demonic possession or witchcraft. The line between ecstatic religious experience and demonic influence grew dangerously thin. Artistic depictions cemented these suspicions in popular imagination. Woodcuts showing witches' Sabbaths inevitably featured wild dancing, creating a visual shorthand. Dancing woman equals witch. This imagery proved so powerful that when young women were seen dancing in forest clearings, witnesses already had a framework to interpret their actions, not as youthful exuberance, but as satanic ritual. Could a recipe book be your grim grimoire? As literacy slowly spread beyond monasteries and universities, private book ownership became possible and perilous. For women especially, possessing written texts triggered suspicions about their contents and purpose. The rising availability of cheaper paper and simplified writing methods allowed even middle-class households to maintain small libraries or personal notebooks. Women often kept commonplace books with recipes, medical remedies, and household management tips. These practical texts could be easily misinterpreted as spell books by illiterate neighbors who equated any female writing with secret knowledge. While learned men debated philosophy in Latin, vernacular texts, written in local languages, faced heightened scrutiny. A woman's handwritten collection of herbal cures raised more suspicion than a man's printed Latin medical text, regardless of content. The medium itself carried gendered implications. Precursors to the Index of Forbidden Books allowed authorities to control knowledge flow, determining which texts were safe for ordinary readers. Possessing prohibited works became evidence of rebellious intent. When inquisitors discovered handwritten books in women's homes, they rarely bothered translating the content before adding them to the evidence pile. The mere possession of written words a woman shouldn't, in their view, be able to understand suggested unholy assistance. Speak your mind. Risk losing your head? Perhaps no trade invited witchcraft accusations more reliably than a woman who simply wouldn't stay silent. The medieval world operated on clear hierarchies: men above women, clergy above laity, nobility above peasantry. Those who challenged these orders through words threatened the entire social fabric. Legal systems systematically silenced female voices. Women's testimony carried less weight than men's, and in many courts women needed male representatives to speak for them. A woman who insisted on direct speech, especially against male authority, displayed unnatural boldness that begged supernatural explanation. Cultural narratives reinforced these restrictions. Eve brought sin through words and disobedience. Pandora released evil through curiosity. Literature and sermons reminded women that silence was virtue. Speech was danger. When Alice Keitler of Kilkenny spoke against her accusers in 1324, her articulate defense became further evidence of her guilt. How could a mere woman speak so persuasively without demonic aid? The tavern tale-teller, the market haggler, the woman who argued with priests, all risked crossing from troublesome to witch. With one sharp word too many, their crime wasn't just breaking social norms but suggesting, through their refusal to be silenced, that those norms might be wrong. No rebellion threatened the medieval order more than women who claimed the right to their own voices. So whether by a simple freckle or a midnight loaf of bread, the thin medieval line between ordinary and occult could snap without warning. The witch hunts reveal less about magic than about power. Who had it, who wanted it, and who was punished for appearing to claim it? Which of these witch markers still echoes in the labels we give one another today? For more journeys into the shadows of history, subscribe now.